I watched the documentary Little Girl Blue. I remembered watching it because I remember like crying the whole night after I had watched that a long time ago. So I remembered like that there was a documentary that made me cry, and I went and looked it up again. It's all like her letters that she wrote to her family when she moved to San Francisco, and when she and then she went back for a little, and then she came back to San Francisco, and as she was like making her ascent into fame and everything. And so it's all from like her words and then like the people closest to her. And
yeah,
it's a hard watch. I love me some Janis, but this story is kind of tragic. So trigger warning. We're talking about Janis Joplin. Welcome to the Siren Songbook, a podcast where we discuss female artists, their music, their history, and the impact they've made on the music industry. Join us each month as we pick a new inspirational artist and celebrate exactly what it is that makes them so magical. Hey everyone, welcome to episode 10 of the Siren Songbook. I'm Amy.
I'm Kasey.
And today, as you heard, we are talking about Janis Joplin. I have always really looked up to Janis. I love singing her music.
I think that I grew up knowing the name, and I knew like the whole 27 Club thing, but it wasn't until I kind of became an adult and I was listening to more music and trying to get more familiar with kind of the stuff that came before me, that I like found her and immediately was enamored by her whole persona. And I felt like, I feel like eerily drawn to her. I feel some parallels in my life, into hers. And, she just seems like she was an overall like really great person.
Yeah.
Really fun person.
They talked a lot in the documentary about how she was very like empathetic to people and just really genuinely cared about people.
Yeah.
And that, you know, in the end could have contributed to why she did so many drugs and everything, because she was just constantly trying to escape that empathetic nature that she had. But it also just made her a really good person, you know?
Yeah. Also,
I'm just looking at the Wikipedia, and she writes hearts at the end of her name like I do.
Oh, that's so cute.
I like you said, I feel I've always just been drawn to her and felt like a lot of parallels and a lot of, I don't know, just this weird connection to her for some reason.
Yeah.
So, do you want to start?
Sure. So, we're going to start with early life here, but Janis Lynn Joplin was born in Port Arthur, Texas on January 19th, 1943. She was a Capricorn. To her mother, Dorothy Benita East, a registrar at a business college, and her husband, which is Janis's father, Seth Ward Joplin, who's an engineer at Texaco. She has two younger siblings, Laura and Michael. And the family attended First Christian Church of Port Arthur, a church belonging to the Christian Church Disciples of Christ denomination. So she had a really religious background as well, which is something that Amy and I have talked about quite a bit, which is where I feel like the parallels with us and her kind of begin. Yeah. Her parents felt that Janis needed more attention than their other children. As a teenager, Joplin befriended a group of outcasts, one of whom had albums by blues artists Bessie Smith, Ma Rainey, and Leadbelly, which Joplin later credited with influencing her decision to become a singer. She began singing blues and folk music with friends at Thomas Jefferson High School, and in high school she was a classmate of Pro Football Hall of Fame coach Jimmy Johnson. So you can bring that up in your next trivia night. Joplin stated that she was ostracized and bullied in high school. As a teen, she became overweight and suffered from acne, leaving her with deep scars that required dermabrasion, which I think that's kind of where I feel like the most like, oh, okay, like I went through the same thing of, you know, being this overweight kid with a lot of acne too. And that like really perpetually, like that kind of like, I went into the later parts of my 20s, like that's like deep shadow. Yeah. Which I feel is something that carried on with her as well. I heard this like bit of trivia when I was younger, that she was voted like ugliest man or something like
Yeah,
that in her high school superlatives.
Yeah, it wasn't in her high school superlatives. It was she had joined this band called the Waller Creek Boys. And
Okay.
there were fraternities in Austin who would hold an ugliest man contest, and they nominated and voted for her, and it broke her heart. And it was like the first time the band had ever seen her cry. And it was just because the band said they didn't like strong, talented women being around. And so they just kind of bullied her.
So shitty. It's like that sort of heartbreak kind of carried with her until the very end. Yeah. You know, other kids in high school would routinely taunt her and call her names like pig, freak, and then they also used very racist terms for, you know, I don't necessarily want to go into what those are, but those are available to be read.
She was also like bullied and ostracized because she stood up in high school for things like immigration and human rights. And in her town, there was a very active KKK chapter. And so they harassed her and bullied her even more because she was for equal rights.
Yeah. She said, you know, I was a misfit. I read, I painted, I thought, I didn't hate black people. Yeah. And unfortunately, she used a different word at the very end of that sentence that, you know, I think of the time was probably far less shocking. But I don't want to you know, paint over that, you know, but that's part of the reason why she was ostracized so much was because she didn't go through the status flow of this like racist, very white, very male dominated town that she grew up in.
Yeah.
She graduated high school in 1960 and attended Lamar State College of Technology in Beaumont, Texas. During the summer and later the University of Texas at Austin, though she did not complete her college studies. The campus newspaper, the Daily Texan, ran a profile on her. The issue dated July 27th, 1962, headlined, quote, "She dared to be different." The article began, "She goes barefoot when she feels like it, wears Levi's to class because they're more comfortable, and carries her auto harp with her everywhere she goes so that in case she gets the urge to break into song, it will be handy. Her name is Janis Joplin." And I don't know how life was in 1962, but I will say nowadays, if I want to feel comfortable, Levi's are not what I'm wearing.
No. It's funny because they talk about stuff like that all the time, like how that was like wearing Levi's was how you were comfortable. And I'm like, I hate wearing jeans now.
Oh, yeah, so, dude.
In that aspect, we've come a long way.
Exactly. I need to be wearing sweats at all time. But while at UT, she performed with a folk trio called the Waller Creek Boys, which we were just referring to, and frequently socialized with the staff of the campus humor magazine, The Texas Ranger. According to Freak Brothers cartoonist Gilbert Shelton, who befriended her, she used to sell The Texas Ranger, which contains some of his early comic books. And just to put into perspective, him as a cartoonist, he was a key member of the underground comics movement. He is the creator of the iconic underground characters, the fabulous furry Freak Brothers, Fat Freddy's Cat, and Wonder Warthog. Right? Her career really began in 1962, and so this early part of her career, Joplin cultivated a rebellious manner and styled herself partly after her female blues heroines and partly after the beat poets. Her first song, "What Good Can Drinkin' Do," was recorded on tape in December of 1962 at the home of a fellow University of Texas student. She left Texas in January of 1963 to, quote, "just get away," she said, because my head was in a much different place. Hitchhiking with her friend Chet Helms to North Beach, San Francisco. Still in San Francisco in 1964, Joplin and future Jefferson Airplane guitarist Jorma Kaukonen recorded a number of blues standards, which incidentally feature Kaukonen's wife Margareta using a typewriter in the background. And this session included 7 tracks called Typewriter Talk, Trouble in Mind, Kansas City Blues, Hesitation Blues, Nobody Knows When You're Down and Out, Daddy, 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 and Long Black Train Blues, and was released long after Joplin's death as a bootleg album called The Typewriter Tape. In 1963, Joplin was arrested in San Francisco for shoplifting, and during the 2 years that followed, her drug use increased, and she acquired a reputation as a speed freak, which are the words that they use, not mine, an occasional heroin user. She also used other psychoactive drugs and was a heavy drinker throughout her career. Her favorite alcoholic beverage was Southern Comfort, which is something that I also knew for a very long time. If you saw pictures of her on stage, she always had Southern Comfort with her. And I immediately wanted to try it because I was like, I want to be like Joplin. Ooh, nasty. That stuff is gross.
This is where I found out that I texted you last night and I was like, I don't know that I'm shocked, but did you know that Janis was bi? Because when she moved to San Francisco, she didn't have a place to live. And she started hanging out at this bar and she met this girl. They never revealed the woman's name. She just like talked on there, but they never revealed her name. But they had like pictures of them. They went to this bar and 2 weeks later they moved in together. And it was her quote roommate, but like as you find out later in the interview, she says she wasn't with girls to shock people, but because that's what she felt at the moment. So she was bi or pan. Pan didn't exist then, but did bi even exist then?
I wonder if that was a title that was used back then. I would assume so, but I'm not super up to date on the history of the etymology of the word.
Yeah. But these two ladies, they would go to the local bars and she would sing in what they called hootenannies. And she would work her way through so that they could get into the main stage area. And one day Bob Dylan was playing there. And that was her idol. And so she told him how much she loved him and that one day she'd be famous. And his response was, yeah, we're all going to be famous. But as her girlfriend at the time was talking, she said she needed that constant reassurance. And she believes that Janis drank and did drugs because of the pain and the experience she thought she had to live to properly sing the blues. They didn't last too long, I don't believe. They don't really say how long it was, but she did say that Janis wanted to be free, to be with who she wanted. She wanted to have fun with other people. And her girlfriend said that she wasn't strong enough to handle that. And so they broke up. But that was the first time I ever found out that Janis was into women. And then as I watched the documentary more, there were a few other women that they talk about throughout the documentary that she was lovers with, is how they put it. But
yeah,
just an interesting tidbit there because I feel like that's not openly talked about. She was living with a quote roommate.
And they were roommates.
Yeah.
In May of 1965, Joplin's friends in San Francisco noticed the detrimental effects on her from regularly injecting methamphetamine. She was described as skeletal and emaciated and persuaded to return to Port Arthur, Texas. During that month, her friends threw her a bus fare party so she could return to her parents in Texas. And just a backstory on what a bus fare party is, or a rent party. It's a social occasion where tenants hire a musician or band to play and pass the hat to raise money to pay their rent, or in this case, a bus fare. Originated in Harlem during the 1920s, these parties were a means for specifically Black tenants to eat, dance, and get away with everyday hardships and discrimination. And it moved on to other things too, which I thought was a really interesting fun fact. But it really cool that there's a group of community that wanted to see her get help.
Yeah.
But she was able to save up the money through this party to be able to move back to Texas. 5 years after the fact, Joplin told Rolling Stone magazine writer David Dalton the following about her first stint in San Francisco. She said, I quote, I didn't have many friends and I didn't like the ones that I had, which is, I guess, sad considering the fact that they were worried enough, but also they were enabling. There were people there enabling her.
She was also in an intense relationship with a guy named Peter DeBlanc at that time, and that's when she really got into the shooting up and meth. And it was at his house where they had no furniture or anything, that they had this bus fare party because she was like you said, losing weight, getting sick, and they all did that. But I can also see why she would say, like, I didn't really like them. Like, yes, they cared enough to get her bus fare, but they also kind of got her into that situation.
Yeah. Back in Port Arthur in the spring of 1965, after Joplin's parents noticed her weight of 88 pounds in total, she had gotten down to 88 pounds. She changed her lifestyle. She avoided drugs and alcohol, adopted a beehive hairdo, and enrolled in an as an anthropology major at Lamar University in nearby Beaumont, Texas. Her sister Laura said in a 2016 interview that social work was her major during her year at Lamar, which really goes into this like feeling of the empathy and care that she had for so many people around her. During her time at Lamar University, she commuted to Austin to sing solo, accompanying herself on acoustic guitar. One of her performances was at a benefit by local musicians for Texas bluesman Mance Lipscomb, who was suffering with ill health. To go off of what Amy said about Peter LeBlanc, she became engaged to him in the fall of 1965, and she had began her relationship with him toward the end of her first stint in San Francisco. But now living in New York, where he worked with IBM computers, he visited her to ask her father for her hand in marriage. Joplin and her mother began planning the wedding, and LeBlanc, who traveled frequently, ended the engagement soon afterward because he sucks, but also dodged a bullet there, girl.
Yeah, they had both said that they were going to get their lives cleaned up and they were going to get married. And he went back, asked for her hand in marriage and everything. And like I said, I was watching this documentary and reading her letters. It's so fucking heartbreaking because he kind of just stopped writing her. And so her letter to him at that point was like, you know, I haven't heard from you and I don't know if I'm still happy. Do I still have you? Or am I sad now? Is basically like, I'm paraphrasing, but it was like, do I still have you? Or should I be depressed now? You know? And her sister was on this documentary, and her sister said that she ended up calling his house and another woman answered. And the woman was pregnant with his child.
Oh my God.
And that's how she found out. And they ended things. So I don't know that he technically ended things. He just stopped writing her and went off with another woman.
Yeah. It's heartbreaking. Men suck.
Yeah, it's like you said, it's heartbreaking. And then like you think about this woman's life and how, or even, I mean, at this point, I would even still call her a girl. She's still young.
Yeah.
And she's been through so much already. And so, you know, it just plays into what eventually happens, and we'll go on with that now, but
yeah,
just sad.
Yeah. In 1965 and 1966, Joplin commuted from her family's Port Arthur home to Beaumont, Texas, where she had regular sessions with a psychiatric social worker named Bernard Giurianto at a counseling agency that was funded by the United Fund, which was, later changed to the United Way. Interviewed by biographer Myra Friedman after his client's death, Bernard said Joplin had been baffled by how she could pursue a professional career as a singer without relapsing into drugs, and her drug-related memories from immediately prior to returning to Port Arthur continued to frighten her. Joplin sometimes brought an acoustic guitar with her to sessions, and people in the offices in the building could hear her singing during these psychiatric meetings. Her psychiatrist tried to reassure her that she did not have to use narcotics to succeed in the music business. And she also said that if she were to avoid singing professionally, she would have to become a key punch operator, as she had done a few years earlier, or a secretary, and then a wife and a mother. And she would have to become similar to all the other women in Port Arthur. Approximately a year before Joplin joined Big Brother and the Holding Company, she recorded 7 studio tracks with her acoustic guitar. Among the songs she recorded were her original composition of Turtle Blues and an alternate version of Codeine by Buffy St. Marie. These tracks were later released in an album in 1995 titled This Is Janis Joplin 1965. But now we're going to move on to that era with Big Brother and the Holding Company. This is kind of when the world gets to meet Janis for the first time.
Yes.
In 1966, Joplin's bluesy vocal style attracted the attention of a San Francisco-based psychedelic rock band, Big Brother and the Holding Company, which had gained some renown among the nascent hippie community in Haight-Ashbury. She was recruited to join the group by Chet Helms, which is somebody that she hitchhiked with to San Francisco the first time, who now is a promoter and was a manager of Big Brother, and with whom she had hitchhiked from Texas just a few years earlier. Helms sent his friend Travis Rivers to find her in Austin, Texas, where she'd been performing with her acoustic guitar, and to accompany her to San Francisco. Aware of her previous nightmare with drug addiction in San Fran, Rivers insisted that she inform her parents face-to-face of her plans, and he drove her from Austin to Port Arthur. He waited in his car while she talked with her startled parents before they began their long drive to San Fran. And she gave her parents the impression Austin was her final destination. And it was the location of the rock band she was joining.
I was like, when you were saying that, I was like, oh, but she did not. She went in and she told her parents, I'm going to this audition. I'm going to Austin and blah, blah, blah. And she leaves. And then she wrote a letter later and she's like, okay, I'm actually in San Francisco. I'm here.
Surprise.
Sorry.
I'm back in the building.
She was, as you mentioned, like she had disclosed her previous addiction and she was very afraid of drugs, but her mom's letter to her said if she goes back out to San Francisco, she'll die. And
so heartbreaking.
It really hurt to read that. And she said she dropped out of college and followed her music, but she felt bad for letting her family down.
It's crazy. It really is. She joined Big Brother on June 4th, 1966, and her first public performance with them was at the Avalon Ballroom in San Francisco. Soon after that, her parents received the letter, exactly what we're talking about, being like, surprise. In June 1966, Joplin was photographed at an outdoor concert in San Francisco that celebrated the summer solstice. The image, which was later published in 2 books by David Dalton, shows her before she relapsed into drugs. Due to persistent persuading by keyboardist and close friend Stephen Ryder, Joplin avoided drugs for several weeks. She shared an apartment with Travis Rivers upon their arrival in San Francisco, made him promise that using needles would not be allowed there. When bandmate David Getz accompanied her from a rehearsal to her home, Rivers was not there, but 2 or 3, according to Getz' recollection 25 years later, guests whom River had invited were in the process of injecting drugs. One of them was about to tie off, recalled Getz, and Janis went nuts. He said, I've never seen anybody explode like that. She was screaming and crying, and Travis walked in. She screamed at him, and she said, we had a pact. You promised me. There wouldn't be any of that in front of me. I was over my head and I tried to calm her down. I said, they're just doing mescaline because that's what I thought it was. And she said, you don't understand. I can't see that. I just can't stand to see that. A San Francisco concert from that summer in 1966 was recorded and released on the 1984 album Cheaper Thrills. In July, all 5 bandmates and guitarist James Gurley's wife, Nancy, moved into a house in Lagunitas, California, where they lived communally. And the band often partied with the Grateful Dead, which is exactly what you were talking about. The members of whom lived less than 2 miles away. And she had a short relationship and a longer friendship with founding member Ron McCarran. The band went to Chicago for a 4-week engagement in August of 1966 and then found itself stranded after the promoter ran out of money when its concerts did not attract the expected audience levels. Yeah. He was unable to pay them, and then in the unfortunate circumstances, the band signed with Bob Shad's record label, Mainstream Records. Recordings from the label took place in Chicago in September, but they were not satisfactory, and the band returned to San Francisco, continuing to perform live, including at the Love Pageant rally. The band recorded 2 tracks, Blind Man and All Is Loneliness, in Los Angeles, and these were released by Mainstream as a single that did not sell well. So they were having a little bit of issues with all that stuff. But in late 1966, Big Brother switched managers from Chet Helms to Julius Carpin. One of Joplin's earliest major performances in 1967 was at the Mantra Rock Dance, a musical event that was held on January 29th at the Avalon Ballroom by the San Francisco Hare Krishna Temple. Janis Joplin and Big Brother performed there along with the Hare Krishna founder, and then a couple other people and the Grateful Dead, donating proceeds to the Krishna Temple. In early 1967, Joplin met Courtney Joe McDonald of the group Country Joe and the Fish. Country Joe McDonald of the group Country Joe and the Fish. The pair lived together as a couple for a few months in her Lion Street apartment. And then Joplin and Big Brother played clubs around San Francisco, like the Fillmore West, Winterland, and the Avalon Ballroom. They also played at the Hollywood Bowl in Los Angeles around this time, as well as in Seattle, Washington, Vancouver, all up and down the West Coast. And this is before their big break.
Yes.
But the band's debut studio album, Big Brother and the Holding Company, was released by Mainstream Records in August 1967, shortly after the group's breakthrough appearance in June at the Monterey Pop Festival. 2 tracks, Cuckoo and Last Time, were released separately as singles, while the tracks from the previous single Blind Man and All His Loneliness were added to the remaining 8 tracks. When Columbia Records took over the band's contract and re-released the album, they included Cuckoo and The Last Time and put featuring Janis Joplin on the cover instead of it just being Big Brother and the Holding Company. The debut album spawned 4 minor hits, and the singles Down on Me, a traditional song arranged by Joplin, Bye Bye Baby, Call on Me, and Cuckoo, on all of which Joplin sang lead vocals. But if you guys go to watch or listen to her discography later after this, you'll notice that Big Brother and the Holding Company was not just fronted by Janis Joplin. They also had other people that sang, so she's not on every single song. But the fact that every single was led by her says a lot. Like, her star power could not be contained.
And this is, around this time before they did the Monterey Pop Festival and everything, and these record companies are coming and like offering things. The band was talking about it in the documentary, and they were saying that she wanted the world, and they were being offered all these deals, and she was actually considering leaving the band and going solo at that point. Mm-hmm. And one of the members was like, just give us a few months, we promise we'll get it together. And she was having trouble because she loved them and she cared about them, but she was worried that the band was going to hold her back. Yeah. But once they decided to stay together, she really tried to like mesh into the band and not be what was called a lead singer. Like, she wanted it to be about the band and not just her. And then they were invited to the Monterey Pop Festival. And that was like really when things changed for them. I don't know if they jump into that in what you're reading right there. But
they somewhat do. It's kind of convoluted, talking about like essentially how the documentary from that time, where they were like doing actual recordings of the show and that sort of thing, is really kind of where people started to see Janis for who she really was. The biggest hit of that time being her doing Big Mama Thornton's song Ball and Chain.
So amazing. Like, I still remember watching that in the history of rock and roll class I was in. And like just being so enamored by that performance. But yes, they were invited to do the Monterey Pop Festival, and they were like, this is going to be a big deal, we need to be there. And so they went. And of course it was a big deal, we all know that. They got there and they were filming the festival, and at first they were like, no, we don't want to be filmed. Like, I think maybe their manager was like, no, we don't want to be filmed, we just want to be in the moment, we want to enjoy this, whatever. And then Janis found out afterwards when they were getting on stage and all the cameras were leaving the stage. And she was like, what's going on? And so they performed their set and it wasn't filmed. And then when they got off stage, Janis was upset. And she was like, this would have been a good opportunity for us and stuff. And after they performed, the people who were filming were like, we need them on film. And so they actually gave them a second set the next day if they agreed to be filmed. And that's where the filming of Ball and Chain and everything happened. Mm-hmm. And you can see Mama Cass, they point that out a lot, like her face as she's watching Janis sing this song and how blown away she is by it. And I always knew that was a big deal, but she was also, they were talking about how it was such a big deal because like there was a rivalry between Los Angeles musicians and San Francisco musicians. So for a Los Angeles musician to be so blown away and like kind of excited about this San Francisco musician was a really actually kind of big deal, I guess. And it did end up being like one of their big pushes forward was this video that they made, and just the fact that people really were introduced to Janis and all of her power at this festival.
It's all super. It is insane how like this kind of really was the turning point for her career. I mean, after all of this came out, I mean, Ball and Chain was included in the Monterey Pop film that was released to theaters throughout the United States in 1969 and shown on televisions in the 1970s. So the rest of the country that hadn't had a chance to really embrace like the summer of love that was happening in San Francisco, or the rivalry between LA and San Fran as a whole, were able to experience it just a few years later in their own theaters or on their own television. And this kind of thus propelled her into this like mythical godlike place that she ended up getting to. A few other notable performances happened around this time following, like Live in Winterland 1968, or at the end of 1967 after they like re-signed with different people, doing a different East Coast tour. And then they also performed at the New York City wake for Martin Luther King Jr. just a few days after he passed, which is a huge honor that they were able to do that. But I wanted to kind of move into her next album, Cheap Thrills. And although Cheap Thrills sounded as if it was considered or consistent of concert recordings, like on Combination of the Two and I Need a Man to Love, only Ball and Chain was actually recorded in front of a paying audience. The rest of the tracks were studio recordings. They just captured the ability, or they captured that magic of the stage in the studio, which is something that even the most pro bands have a really hard time being able to do. I mean, it really goes to show just how special this was. The album had a raw quality, including the sound of a drinking glass breaking and the broken shards being swept away during the song Turtle Blues. Cheap Thrills produced popular hits with Piece of My Heart, which I believe is probably her most popular song, and Summertime. And together with the premiere of the documentary film Monterey Pop at New York's Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts on December 26, 1968, the album launched Joplin as a star. Cheap Thrills reached #1 on the Billboard 200 album charts 8 weeks after its release and was #1 for 8 non-consecutive weeks. The album was certified gold at release and sold over 1 million copies in the first month of its release. The lead single from the album, Piece of My Heart, reached #12 on the Billboard Hot 100 in the fall of 1968. The band made another East Coast tour during July-August of 1968, performing at the Columbia Records Convention in Puerto Rico and the Newport Folk Festival. After returning to San Francisco for 2 hometown shows at the Palace of Fine Arts Festival on August 31st and September 1st, Joplin announced that she would be leaving Big Brother and the Holding Company. And on September 14th, 1968, culminating a 3-night engagement together at Fillmore West, fans thronged to the concert that Bill Graham publicized as the last official concert of Janis Joplin with Big Brother and the Holding Company. The opening acts on that night were Chicago, then still called Chicago Transit Authority, and Santana.
Wow.
Fucking crazy. Despite Graham's announcement that the Fillmore West gig was Big Brother's last concert with Joplin, the band, with Joplin still as the lead vocalist, toured the U.S. that fall. Reflecting Joplin's crossover appeal, 2 October 1968 performances at a roller rink in Alexandria, Virginia were reviewed by John Segraves of the conservative Washington Evening Star at the time, when the Washington metropolitan area's hard rock scene was in its infancy. An opera buff at the time, he wrote, Miss Joplin, in her early 20s, has been for the last year or two the vocalist of Big Brother and the Holding Company, a rock quintet of superior electric expertise. Shortly, she will be merely Janis Joplin, a vocalist singing folk rock on her first album as a single. Whatever she does and whatever she sings, she'll do well because her vocal talents are boundless. This is the way she came across in a huge high ceilinged roller skating rink without any acoustics, but frankly a good enough sound system behind her. In a proper room, I would imagine there would be no adjectives to describe her. Which is such a sweet thing to say.
It is.
And later in October of 1968, Big Brother performed at the University of Massachusetts and at the Worcester, that's like the worst word in the word for me to be able to say, Polytechnic Institute, and played at the Syracuse War Memorial as part of Syracuse University's fall homecoming. Opening for the Butterfield Blues Band for their closing song. Aside from 2 1970 reunions, Joplin's last performance officially with Big Brother was at a Chet Helms benefit in San Francisco on December 1st, 1968. And officially in 1969, she begins her solo career.
Yeah. And during this time, like, the documentary gets into a little bit more about, like, you know, the separation of the band and everything. And I just really wanted to point out the fact that, like, a big reason why she ended up leaving was because the band started having issues with the fact that everyone was noticing Janis as the star. She was the drawing factor. And they were upset about this, that she was getting all the attention. And then they were also being criticized for playing sloppy. They weren't keeping up with her caliber. And I feel like we both have had experience.
Lots of parallels.
Yeah. And so that was like a big factor playing into her leaving and going on her own at this time, was just that they couldn't stand the fact that she was a rising star. But however, when she did leave, it's like she couldn't make anyone happy because, you know, like everybody was like, oh, that band's sloppy and she's better than that. And then she leaves and then they're all upset that she's not playing with that band anymore. And they don't like her new band. Yeah. And, you know, but she goes off into her solo career. And I personally like the albums she made in her solo career the best. That's my opinion. But yeah, I'll let you get into her solo career now. But I just wanted to throw that in there, that was a big reason why she ended up leaving. And I think that's worthy of being noted, that it was, again, just men being afraid of her power and her recognition.
After splitting from Big Brother and the Holding Company, Joplin formed a new backup group, the Cosmic Blues Band, composed of session musicians like keyboardist Stephen Ryder and saxophonist Cornelius Snooky Flowers, as well as former Big Brother and the Holding Company guitarist Sam Andrew and future Full Tilt Boogie Band bassist Brad Campbell. The band was influenced by the Stax Volt rhythm and blues and soul bands of the 1960s, as exemplified by Otis Redding and the Bar-Kays. The Strat Volt R&B sound was typified by the use of horns and had a funky pop-oriented sound in contrast to many of the psychedelic hard rock bands in that period. By early 1969, Joplin was allegedly shooting at least $200 worth of heroin per day, which The equivalent to that would be about $1,600 a day worth of heroin. Although efforts were made to keep her clean during the recording of I Got Them Old Cosmic Blues Again, Mama, Gabriel Melker, who produced the album, told publicist turned biographer Myra Friedman after Joplin's death that she had lived in his Los Angeles house during the June 1969 recording sessions at his insistence so he could keep her away from drugs and her drug-using friends. Joplin's appearance with the Cosmic Blues Band in Europe were released in theaters in multiple documentaries. Janis, which was reviewed by the Washington Post in March 21st of 1975, shows Joplin arriving in Frankfurt by plane and waiting inside a bus next to the Frankfurt venue, while an American female fan who was visiting Germany expressed enthusiasm to the camera. No security was used in Frankfurt, so by the end of the concert, the stage was so packed with people that band members could not see each other.
Yeah.
Janis included interviews with Joplin in Stockholm from her visit to London for her gig at Royal Albert Hall, and the London interview was dubbed with a voiceover in the German language for broadcast on German television. John Byrne Cook, road manager for Joplin and the Cosmic Blues Band, wrote a book published in 2014 in which he discussed her knowledge of the risks of her ongoing use of narcotics, particularly when she was outside of the United States. On an episode of the Dick Cavett Show that was telecast to the United States on the night of July 18th, 1969, Joplin and her band performed Try, Just a Little Bit Harder, as well as To Love Somebody. Sorry. Released in September of 1969, the Cosmic Blues album was certified gold later that year, but did not match the success of Cheap Thrills. Reviews of the new group were mixed. Some music critics, including Ralph J. Gleason of the San Francisco Chronicle, were negative. Gleason wrote that the new band was a drag, and Joplin should scrap her new band and go right back to being a member of Big Brother if they'll have her. Other reviewers, such as reporter Carl Bernstein of the Washington Post, devoted entire articles to celebrating the singer's magic. Bernstein's review said that Joplin, quote, has finally assembled a group of first-rate musicians with whom she is totally at ease and whose abilities complement the incredible range of her voice. Columbia Records released Cosmic Blues as a single, which peaked at number 41 on the Billboard Hot 100, and a live rendition of Raise Your Hand was released in Germany and became a top 10 hit there. Containing other hits like Try, Just a Little Bit Harder, To Love Somebody, and Little Girl Blue, I Got Them Old Cosmic Blues Again, Mama reached number 5 on the Billboard 200 soon after its release. Joplin then appeared at Woodstock starting at approximately 2 a.m. on Sunday, August 17th, 1969. Joplin informed her band that they would be performing at the concert as if it was just another gig. On Saturday afternoon, when she and the band were flown by helicopter with a pregnant Joan Baez and Baez's mother from a nearby motel to the festival site, Joplin saw the enormous crowd, and she instantly became extremely nervous and giddy. Upon landing and getting off the helicopter, Joplin was approached by reporters asking her questions. She referred them to her friend and sometimes lover, Peggy Castra, as she was too excited to speak. Initially, Joplin was eager to get on the stage and perform, but was repeatedly delayed as bands were contractually obligated to perform ahead of Joplin. Faced with a 10-hour wait after arriving at the backstage area, Joplin spent some of that time shooting heroin and drinking alcohol with Castra in a tent. The director's cut of the Woodstock movie shows Joplin and Jefferson Airplane singer Grace Slick standing together near amplifiers watching the band Canned Heat's performance, which started at 7:30 p.m. Saturday. Castra does not appear within camera range, and when Joplin reached the stage at approximately 2 a.m. on Sunday, she was, quote, 3 sheets to the wind, according to biographer Alice Eccles. During her performance, Joplin's voice became slightly hoarse and wheezy, and she struggled to dance. Joplin pulled through, though, and engaged frequently with the crowd, asking them if they had everything they needed and if they were staying stoned. The audience cheered for an encore, to which Joplin replied and sang Ball and Chain. Pete Townsend, who performed with The Who later in the same morning after Joplin finished, witnessed her performance and said in his 2012 memoir, quote, "She had been amazing at Monterey, but tonight she wasn't at her best, due probably to the long delay and probably, too, to the amount of booze and heroin she'd consumed while she waited. But even Janis on an off night was incredible." Janis remained at Woodstock for the remainder of the festival. Starting at approximately 3 a.m. on Monday, August 18th, Joplin was among many Woodstock performers who stood in a circle behind Crosby, Stills, and Nash during their performance, which was the first time anyone at Woodstock ever had heard the group perform. This information was published by David Crosby in 1988. Later in the morning of August 18th, Joplin and Joan Baez sat in John Crocker's van and witnessed Hendrix' close-of-show performance, according to Baez's memoir and the voice to sing with. I can't even believe the amount of like superhuman star power was at Woodstock, and I know that people talk about that all the time, but still photographs in color show Joplin backstage with Grace Slick the day after Joplin's performance, where Joplin appears to be very happy. She was ultimately unhappy with her performance, however, and blamed Castra, her lover at the time. Her singing was not included, but her own insistence in the her singing was not included by her own insistence in the 1970 documentary film or the soundtrack for Woodstock, music from the original soundtrack, and more, although the 25th anniversary director's cut of Woodstock included her performance of Work Me Lord. The documentary film of the festival that was released in theaters during 1970 includes, on the left side of a split screen, 37 seconds of footage of Joplin and Castro walking towards Joplin's dressing room tent. In addition to Woodstock, Joplin had problems at Madison Square Garden in 1969 as well. Biographer Myra Friedman said that she had witnessed a duet Joplin sang with Tina Turner during the Rolling Stones concert at the Garden on Thanksgiving Day. Friedman said Joplin was so drunk, so stoned, so out of control that she could have been an institutionalized psychotic rent from mania, or rent by mania. An audio recording of the duet exists online if anyone wants to hear it, but during another Garden concert where she had solo billing on December 19th, some observers believe Joplin tried to incite the audience to riot. For part of this concert, she was joined on stage by Johnny Winter and Paul Butterfield. She was then arrested for vulgar and indecent language on November 16th, 1969 at the Curtis Hickson Hall after yelling, "Don't fuck with those people," towards the police doing crowd control during the performance. An hour after being booked, Joplin was released on a $504 bond, and Joplin failed to attend trial and was subsequently found guilty and fined $200+ in court costs. Joplin then told rock journalist David Dalton that the Garden audiences watched and listened to every note she sang with, "Is she gonna make it?" in their eyes. In her interview with Dalton, she added that she felt most comfortable performing at small, cheap venues in San Francisco that were associated with the counterculture.
And, you know, like you get into Woodstock and stuff, and I had written down here because they did mention Peggy, her lover, at the time, and how she was kind of like a big enabler for Janis. And, you know, she got really like into the drugs again and stuff, everything. Well, she already was, but it got worse during this time. And, she almost didn't even make it on stage for her Woodstock performance. She, Peggy and another one of the band members had to like push her onto stage to sing for that festival. Because she was so far gone. And a lot of people actually, and whether this is true or not, or whether this is just people placing blame, a lot of people blame that time and that Woodstock era of taking drugs on Peggy. Again, whether this is true, whether this is just people trying to find a place to put blame, whether this is people upset that she had a female lover at this time, whether, you know, we'll never know. But that's just a little interesting fact. Also, Peggy was not going to come because of the crowds and the fact that like the traffic was horrendous, and Janis flew her in on a helicopter. So
ridiculous.
Yeah, just thinking about Woodstock is insane to me. The sheer, like, we see festivals all the time now, but just the sheer amount of power that had back in that time, and like you said, the amount of out of this world performers that were there. The whole Woodstock thing, period, just blows my mind.
I know that every time I watch like some sort of documentary about it or read any book about it, I'm like blown away. It's insane.
Yeah.
It is interesting. There's a few more instances that we could hit leading up to her untimely death. But I wanted to focus on a couple of things in particular. We talked about how empathetic she was. And this is something that I found out about not super long ago. I think someone on TikTok made a video that I hadn't heard of before. But she was a huge fan of Bessie Smith, and in some ways felt as though she like embodied the soul of Bessie Smith, and felt almost like, there's like a word for it, but she felt almost as though she was like, a place for Bessie Smith's soul to, like a reincarnated Bessie Smith, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, when Bessie Smith died, she was buried in an unmarked grave. And on August 7th of 1970, a tombstone was jointly paid for by her and Juanita Green, who as a child had done housework for Bessie Smith, and erected at Smith's previously unmarked grave. So where they found her unmarked grave, they were able to put a tombstone there. And the following day, the Associated Press circulated this news, and an August 9th edition of the New York Times carried it. The lead paragraph of the AP story said Joplin and Green had, quote, shared the cost of a stone for the Empress of the Blues. But according to a publicist and biographer, Myra Friedman, the two women never met. Joplin had been at home in Lynchburg, California, when she had received a long-distance phone call with an explanation of the need to finance a gravestone for Bessie Smith, whom Joplin had frequently cited as a musical influence. Joplin immediately wrote a check and mailed it to the name and address provided by the phone caller. On August 8th of 1970, as the Associated Press circulated the news about Smith's new gravestone, Joplin performed at the Capitol Theater in Port Chester, New York. It was there that she performed Mercedes-Benz for the first time, a song partially inspired by a Michael McClure poem, and that she had composed with fellow musician and friend Bob Newworth a very short time earlier. And according to Myra Friedman's account, Joplin performed 2 shows at the Capitol Theater, the first of which was attended by actors Geraldine Page and her husband Rip Torn. Is it Rip Torn or Rip Thorne? I don't know, but that's a funny name. Between the shows at a gin mill close to this concert venue, Joplin and Newworth penned the lyrics of the song, and she performed it as the second show. And I felt like that was really interesting. She also, so she did end up leaving the band that she started, the Cosmic Blues Band, and then started the Full Tilt Band, a Full Tilt Boogie specifically.
And I know at this time she also like really took that on herself. She had a hard time feeling like she felt like that was her fault. It was a failure on her that the band dissolved. And so she fell even deeper into the drugs and alcohol at this time, which is just sad to see all these things keep happening.
I know. And unfortunately, she did not perform with Full Tilt Boogie Band for very long. Her final performance was on August 12th, 1970 at the Harvard Stadium in Boston. The Harvard Crimson gave the performance a positive front-page review, despite the fact that Full Tilt Boogie had performed with makeshift amplifiers after the regular sound equipment was stolen in Boston.
Oh my God.
Sorry, I was just trying to read something ahead. Joplin then 2 days later attended her high school reunion on August 14th, accompanied by Newworth, road manager John Cook, and sister Laura. But it was reportedly an unhappy experience for her. Joplin held a press conference in Port Arthur during her reunion visit, and when asked by a reporter if she ever entertained at Thomas Jefferson High School when she was a student there, Joplin replied, "Only when I walk down the aisles." Joplin denigrated Port Arthur and the classmates who had humiliated her a decade earlier.
I did get to watch that like interview, like they had clips from it, and yeah, you could tell she was just very, very upset and sad. Also during this time, she was off and on again becoming sober. she had met a guy named David on a trip to Brazil. She went for like the festival that happens in Rio, and she had gone to like just enjoy herself, and then she decided to just hitchhike around Brazil for a while. And while she was there, she was becoming clean, and David was there like on the first few nights that she was becoming clean, and he held her as she became sober again. And then when she came back, she was like, do you want to come back with me? And he had fallen in love with her on the trip and did so. Unfortunately, every time he had to leave to go work or something, she would fall back into her heroin addiction. And eventually he was like, I love you, but I can't do this. And so he left shortly before the reunion. And then she went back to the reunion, and it was kind of a disaster. Like you said in her interviews, she was like, I didn't like it here. I was not, everybody bullied me here. It was not happy reunion for her. And it was really awkward to watch the interviews, and you could just see in the way she was talking how upset and sad she was. She also talked about how her parents and teachers always assumed she would end up in an insane asylum or the pen, and her parents felt like she rubbed against their way of life. Yeah.
In these last few months that she was still alive, she went back to work to record Pearl, which was set to be released the following year. And recorded the track Me and Bobby McGee, which is a cover of a Chris Christopherson song, who apparently she also had a relationship with. and also the lead singer of The Doors was hitting her up too. There was a lot of people that were really interested in her.
She had a lot of fun with a lot of people.
I'm jealous. She was engaged once again to a 21-year-old UC Berkeley student, cocaine dealer, and future novelist named Seth Morgan. He's published one book, Homeboy, in 1990, and was working on a second novel when he died. He was Janis Joplin's fiance at the time of her death, but they were engaged to be married in early September.
Oh, really? That is interesting, because on the documentary I watched, she was still talking to this David guy.
Maybe she was talking to all of them.
Maybe. And she was hoping that if she got clean, he would come back and want to marry her.
Interesting. I feel like she was probably someone who had many, many lovers.
Yeah. Because he had left, and then she actually wrote him, and she's like, I'm getting clean. And you talk about this last album, Pearl. She was working with her producer, and he was actually teaching her like how to sing properly, so that she didn't blow out her voice, because she was always just like, when I blow out my voice, I'm gonna buy a bar, and that's what I'm gonna do. And he was teaching her how to sing, and they were talking about how she was going to be singing 30 years down the line and making her best album ever. And she was saying that she was her happiest, but she was also so lonely and sad on her off hours. And so she had written to this like David guy again. And she was just like, I'm getting clean. I'm working on this new album. I'm getting better, and all this stuff. And then they found a letter from him, or a telegram from him, the morning after she passed.
Oh, wow.
Where he said, I love you and I miss you, and we can meet anytime in wherever he was. I can't remember where it was right now. But that late October is the best. And as we know, she died October 4th, 1970. Everyone had thought she had kicked the habit, and they assumed that she just decided to do it one last time and that nobody would know. And she passed that night. So
I guess it was assumed that the heroin that she purchased, not only was that like compounded by alcohol,
yeah.
but that it was stronger heroin than anyone that she knew was like used to ever trying. And her death was ruled accidental. Here it says that both Peggy Castro, who obviously she was having an on again, off again relationship with, and also was a fellow drug user, and Seth Morgan, Joplin's alleged fiance at the time, one of them,
Yeah.
or failed to meet Joplin on October 2nd, the Friday immediately before her death. And Joplin had been expecting both of them to keep her company that night. And according to Castro, Joplin was saddened neither of her friends came to the landmark as promised. And during the 24 hours Joplin lived after that disappointment, Castro did not call to explain why she failed to show up. In her own autobiography, Castro admitted to waiting until late Saturday night to dial the Landmark Hotel switchboard, only to learn that Joplin had instructed the desk clerk not to accept any incoming calls for her after midnight. Morgan did speak to Joplin via telephone within the 24 hours before her death, but little is known about that call. She used a phone at Sunset Sound Recordings where her colleagues, there were perhaps 20 to 25 people present, noticed that whatever Morgan said to her made her very angry. This is the person that she allegedly was also engaged to in this article. But speaking of the legacy of her, Joplin's death in October at the age of 27 stunned her fans and shocked the music world, especially when coupled with the deaths of Canned Heat singer Alan Wilson a month earlier and rock icon Jimi Hendrix 16 days earlier, both aged 27 as well. All three musicians performed at the two biggest rock festivals in the 1960s, Monterey Pop Festival and Woodstock. This would later cause some people to attribute significance to the death of musicians at the age of 27, as celebrated in the 27 Club. Music historian Tom Moon wrote that Joplin had a devastatingly original voice. Music columnist John Parallels of the New York Times wrote that Joplin as an artist was overpowering and deeply vulnerable. And author Megan Terry said that Joplin was the female version of Elvis Presley in her ability to captivate an audience. A book about Joplin by her publicist, Myra Friedman, titled Buried Alive, The Biography of Janis Joplin, 1973, was excerpted in many newspapers. At the same time, Peggy Castro's memoir, Going Down with Janis, which also came out the same year, attracted much attention. Its provocative title is a reference to Castro's claim that she had engaged in oral sex with Joplin while they were high on heroin in September of 1970, which I'm sure at that time was quite a big deal. The description provided by Dan Knapp, Castro's co-author, whom she denounced decades later, repelled many people in 1973 when few books or films or filmed interviews of Joplin or her loved ones were accessible to the public. Joplin's bandmate Sam Andrew described Castro as halfway between a groupie and a friend in an interview with writer Ellis Amburn, and soon after the 1973 publication of Going Down with Janis, Joplin's friends learned that graphic descriptions of sexual acts and intravenous drugs drug use was not the only portions of the book that would haunt them. But this book seems to be like quite a big stir.
Yeah.
Joplin's body art with a wristlet and a small heart on her left breast by the San Francisco tattoo artist Lyle Tuttle marked an early moment in the popular culture's acceptance of tattoos as art. Another trademark was her flamboyant hairstyles, which often included colored streaks and accessories such as scarves, beads, and feathers, which I think is really cool. So like even the way that she actually like dressed and looked was huge. I think most people talk about just how influential she was. In 1988, on what would have been Joplin's 45th birthday, the Janis Joplin Memorial, with an original gold multi-image sculpture of Joplin by Douglas Clark, was dedicated during a ceremony in Port Arthur, Texas. In 1992, the first major biography of Joplin in 2 decades, Love, Janis, authored by her younger sister Laura Joplin, was published. And in an interview, Laura stated that Joplin enjoyed being on the Dick Cavett show, that Joplin had difficulties with some but not all people at Thomas Jefferson High School, and that Joplin enthusiastically talked about Woodstock with her parents and siblings during a visit to their Texas home a few weeks after she performed there. In 1995, Joplin was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And in 2005, she received a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award. In November of 2009, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame Museum honored her as part of its annual American Music Masters series. Among the artifacts at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame Museum exhibition are Joplin's scarf and necklaces, her psychedelically painted 1965 Porsche 356, and a sheet of LSD blotting paper designed by Robert Crumb, designer of the Cheap Thrills cover. Also in 2009, Joplin was the honoree at the Rock Hall's American Music Master Concert and Lecture Series. In the late 1990s, the musical play Love, Janis was created and directed by Randall Myler, with input from Janis's younger sister Laura and Big Brother guitarist Sam Andrew, with an aim to take it to off-Broadway. Opening in the summer of 2001 and scheduled for only a few weeks of performances, the show won acclaim and played to packed houses and was held over several times. So her influence is, it knows no bounds. Even Pink has said about Joplin that she was so inspiring by singing blues music when it wasn't culturally acceptable for white women, and she wore her heart on her sleeve. She was so witty and charming and intelligent, but she also battled an ugly duckling syndrome. I would love to play her in a movie, is what Pink said, in a tribute performance to her on her Try This tour. Pink called Joplin a woman who inspired me when everyone else didn't.
She's definitely lived beyond her. Like, she's still very much alive in music and in just our culture in general. She's a huge impact on everything in our music culture, I feel like.
And just in a short time, too. Her music career was only 4 years long. And in that 4-year span, she was able to accomplish so much.
Yeah.
It's insane,
I know that she's been a big inspiration for me personally. Like, you watch her performances and no performance is ever the same. She was 100% free when she performed.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something I always inspired to be. And even like the fact that like she was so like, she didn't want her band to be messy. She wanted them to practice. She wanted them to know, but she also wanted them to be free, which is I feel like a line that a lot of bands struggle with. Like, I've never found a band that was like, yes, we rehearse really well, but we also have like our free time on stage. But also like it's always been one or the other. It's always been, no, we just do what we do, and that's music, and that's rock and roll, and that's how it is. Or you're really, really well rehearsed, and that's kind of what you do every time you go on stage. I've never, as a musician, been able to experience that in between that I feel like Janis found really well. I've always really admired that about her. Also, going back to her style, and like you were talking about, like how people talked about how she always had feathers in her hair and the things she wore. And she just we've talked about this before on the podcast, but a very recognizable fashion sense that like when you see it, you go, that's Janis, or that's, so-and-so.
Yeah.
And there was this one really funny story of her mom was coming into town. Her family was coming into town. And she was so nervous, and she was decorating her apartment, and she put up these posters that they had made. It was that nude photo shoot they did where she just had beads on. I don't know if you've ever seen that one.
Yeah.
And she had hung the posters up in her house for her mom when she was coming over.
I love that.
And it just, there's something so, like, she's so nervous that her mom's coming over, but she's also so free that she's like, hey, look at these naked pictures of me. I love it so much.
Such a free spirit.
Yes. And I think that's how she would want to be remembered too. I feel like that was always her thing. She struggled with a lot of issues, but she was empathetic, she was kind, and she was free. We are going to take a short break and hear from some of our fellow podcasts, and then we will be right back with our favorite songs and albums.
What happens when you get a bunch of obsessive music lovers sitting around a table and talking about every aspect in music? You get the Untitled Mixtape. Join Danko, Lewis, and Lorenzo in this educational but enjoyable podcast that encourages everyone to branch out and expand what they listen to. From deep dives to letting you know what is a bop or flop, the Untitled Mixtape boys are sure to take care of your music needs every Wednesday on your favorite podcast platform. The Untitled Mixtape, a Bassblown Entertainment podcast.
Welcome to Know Your Rights, a music podcast from two guys who know just enough about songwriting to start a podcast about.
Follow Rob
And Colton.
as each week we dive into a different band or songwriter and discuss what makes them great, okay,
Or otherwise.
music is law.
And we know our rights.
Streaming bi-monthly wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Know Your Rights, a Bassblown Entertainment podcast.
Did you get to listen through all of her albums and everything?
I listened through as much as I could. There are so many albums, whether they're compilation albums or like released albums from like years later, and a lot of them have a lot of the same material. So it was on Spotify specifically. So
I kind of just focused on like that first album with Big Brother and the Holding Company to Pearl, because I was just like, there's so much here that I don't know that I can handle it right now.
yeah, no, I totally feel that.
So I listened to her first album with Big Brother and the Holding Company, and I ended with Pearl, and that's kind of where I stopped. But in your listening, what would you say was your favorite album? Which is kind of interesting to say, because she had like Big Brother Holding Company, and then she had the her solo career, and both of them were with different bands, I believe, both of those albums.
Yeah,
so
I believe so.
There's a lot of like changes in between each album too, but which was your favorite?
I gotta say, honestly, I really like Cheap Thrills. I think it in general is a very sonically cohesive album. It's very actualized. But when I think of Janis specifically, I think of Pearl, you know? So it is really interesting. Like, I think Cheap Thrills is a fantastic album. And that's, you know, recognized in all of the accolades it was given, rightly so. But I guess when I think of Janis, I'm always thinking of like that album cover too, of her sitting in that chair. And like the boa in her hair and stuff like that. Like Pearl is quintessentially Janis Joplin, you know?
It is. I feel like, yes, I love Cheap Thrills, and partially because some of my favorite songs when I think of Janis are on there, like her singing Ball and Chain, Piece of My Heart. I love those songs from Janis. But I will say, when I got them Old Cosmic Blues Again, Mama, and Pearl, that sounded more like Janis to me. And I feel like, especially on the Cheap Thrills thing, like Ball and Chain and Piece of My Heart have that Janis vibe, and that's why I'm so drawn to those on that album.
Yeah.
And I feel like when she got to those two solo albums, it was just like those two songs through the whole thing. I would say probably, Pearl would be my favorite album. That has Me and Bobby McGee, which is like her most popular, what they call her most popular song to date. Mercedes-Benz, Cry Baby. Oh my God, I love Cry Baby. I think that's my favorite album. What about your favorite song?
I feel like I probably have to go with, like, I don't know. I talk about this at the end of every episode.
Yeah.
Like, I really, like, there are songs that are popular for a reason. And specifically, every time I think of Janis Joplin, I think of Piece of My Heart. And the way her voice just like breaks. It's like it's almost like there's no more gas left. Like she gives everything in that recorded performance, and I just think that it's such a fantastic. It's like it's a masterclass in singing and performing and being a star. She is leaping off the track and into your ear holes.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably why that's not only is that like the song I know the best, because that's I think everyone's song that they first are introduced to when they listen to her, but also I just think that it really is some of her best work.
I do too. Although I will say my favorite song, it's so hard because I feel like it's a tie between Crybaby and Ball and Chain for me. Because Crybaby, kind of the same thing. Like, she just puts everything into that.
Yeah.
Ball and Chain is a weird one for me because I love the recording of it. I think it's beautiful. But my favorite is her performance at Monterey Pop.
Yeah.
Like, that's where I love her singing Ball and Chain. And so if I was to go off of the albums, I'd say Crybaby, because like you said, it's like a masterclass, and like she just puts everything back there, and you hear nobody I feel like that I can think of since Janis Joplin can control those breaks the way she did. There's something so uniquely Janis that I feel like there hasn't been a voice like that ever. Like, people can break like that. Like, Brandi Carlile can break.
Yeah.
And it kind of reminds me of that. But Janis was just like a constant. It was always there. Her voice is so unique that I feel like nobody else has captured that.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that last night because, like, sometimes, especially when I was singing in my blues band, people would be like, "Oh, you're like Janis," and I'm like, "I'm not like Janis." Thank you.
The ultimate compliment.
Thank you. I appreciate it, but I am not like Janis.
I know. It's like the same walking off stage and people are like, It's like, I've gotten a couple times where like, wow, you remind me of Stevie Nicks. And I'm like, that is literally the greatest thing you could ever say to me. And also the biggest goddamn lie.
Yeah.
Shut your mouth. So funny.
Yeah, I feel like I'd go with Crybaby. I feel like I'm going to go with Crybaby because of just the way that she breaks in that. And like you said, she gave everything to that performance in a studio, which is so insane.
It is really, really crazy.
Like, as someone who has recorded in a studio before, it is hard to recreate something like that on an album. And she somehow could get that magic recorded. And it just blows my mind. She has a live performance of that song where she's talking about that David guy that I was telling you about that she fell in love with in Brazil. And he wrote the telegram that showed up on the desk the day after she died. But she was doing a live performance of it right after he had left. And she's like stopping in the middle and talking about like how this man just like walked away and he went to New York or Africa or wherever these men go. And it was like heartbreaking, but also kind of funny. And also like, I don't know. It was just real. I guess that's the word I'm looking for. It was real. And so every time I hear that song, I get that feeling of like she really felt that. So
yeah.
That is my favorite song from her. What is the biggest thing you take away from Janis Joplin?
Ooh. It's a good question. I feel like I couldn't say, embrace being yourself, because I think that that's something that she really struggled with too.
Yeah.
But maybe that is the lesson, is that even like superstars, even like people that we perceive to be gods, also struggle with their self-esteem, and they can be bullied too, and they can be treated a specific way. And I think that you really have to prioritize yourself and prioritize getting the help that you need, because that type of thought process can rob you of your life.
Yeah. I was thinking about it when we were talking, like we were just talking about Chapel Roan last week, and how she's really like changing the industry in a way that she's like, I need time for my mental health and I'm going to take it. Mm-hmm. And you can't talk to me that way. And people are upset about that, but I think it's so important, because you look at people like Janis, and even in the interview, like I wrote down that there was this one guy who she was writing letters back about. She was boyfriends with, he was her boyfriend, and everybody in the rock scene thought it was cute because he was the lead singer of another band.
Yeah.
And everybody just thought it was the cutest thing in the world. And she's like, and it is kind of cute, and I really like him. And then it cuts to him and he's all, we were never in love.
Oh my God.
We never had a spark. And I was just like gutted. And so the fact that like she dealt with all that stuff, and you can't blame that for the road she went down, but she handled a lot of really hurtful things.
Yeah.
And she was, as we've talked about, was a very empathetic person. And she says she let it all out on stage, but then as soon as that high from being on stage would wear off, she needed something to cope.
Yeah.
And to think like if she had the kind of help she needed, if she was able to take the time she needed to deal with the things that she needed to deal with, would she still be here?
Yeah.
And I feel like we see things like this all the time with celebrities, where they don't take the time that they need or get the help that they need. And they're just expected to just take it, and that's part of being a celebrity. And I don't know. I went down this deep rabbit hole with like the fact that we were talking about Chapel Roan and how she's kind of changing all of that. And I hope that she continues to take time, because just comparing her to Janis this week was like, I wish that Janis had been able to do that or did do that, Oh no.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
We gotta prioritize their health. I'm glad that Chapel is doing that. Almost feels like she's healing decades of wounds.
Yeah. Yeah. As far as what I take from Janis, I feel like there's so many life lessons you can take from it. Because like you said, there's like, she felt like, I want to say like she taught me to be free, but she was never free herself.
Yeah.
So it's like, there's the free and the aspect of like, she'd walk in barefoot when she wanted to walk barefoot, and she'd put on Levi jeans because they were, like the outwardly appearance of being free, and not the inwardly, like the inward work of being free.
Yeah.
I do take, like that she was unafraid to do that stuff, and appreciate that she was unafraid to be free when she did her music and just go where the music led her,
Mm-hmm.
But also I think that there's an aspect of like, also make sure that you're doing the inward work too.
Yeah.
Also, just as a musician, like I said, the freedom to just let go completely on stage was a big thing for me.
Yeah.
Like there were times that a note wouldn't come out perfect, and that was okay, because she was selling a a type of magic almost, rather than perfection, that I've always admired in Janis. And you know, you could get into the whole thing of, you know, she wasn't selling, you know, perfection all the time. She was going where the music led her, and through that it was a type of perfection.
Yeah.
And so as a musician, that's something that I take from her, is the being unafraid to just go where you feel. Yeah, I think that's it. I think that's what I take. And then also like the making sure that you're doing the inward work too.
I think that's really important.
Yeah. So it's a tragic story. Like we said at the beginning, like it's a heavy one.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I tend to forget about how heavy her story was when I listen to her music, just because I'm a very empathetic person too, and I can't carry that around all the time.
Yeah. Oh, I feel that.
I want to enjoy her music, but also, like, I think we just forget because we just hear this fun-loving, free spirit when we listen to the music. And so I wish we had her along for longer, but I'm glad that she still lives on and that she is revered and remembered as one of the most influential women in rock and roll. Anyway, I don't really know how to end this because it's just so sad. Like, I want to end it on a happy note, but Janis is a heavy artist to talk about. But yes, if you haven't listened to Janis's stuff, go listen to it. I personally believe that listening to her music is life-changing. This is our last episode for this season.
Woohoo!
Woo! We're going to take a few months off, enjoy the holidays, and we'll be back in January. Mm-hmm. You're the one who gets to pick who our next artist is. So do you want to pick who we're starting our next season off with?
Oh my goodness. I know there were a couple people that we were like floating around. Mm-hmm. But I would actually really like to do Hayley Williams from Paramore, who also does solo music.
Yes.
I love that lady down.
That will be a great start to the season. I am so down for that.
Woohoo!
Woo!
So exciting.
Yay! So we will be back in January talking about Hayley Williams.
Hell yeah.
That's going to be a fun one. So
I guys have a great holiday season.
Yes, have a great holiday season. When we come back, Kasey will be a college graduate.
Oh my God, yeah, I will. I will be a college graduate. Ew.
Ew. And yeah, all of you stay safe, enjoy your holidays, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
When it comes to making the goings-on of the world entertaining, we got you covered. The Chit Show is a news, pop culture, geek culture, and music podcast hosted by none other than Danny, a.k.a. Danko, and me, Leo, a.k.a. DJ Brute. Tune in as we cover all sorts of topics with a very opinionated and wild twist. The Chit Show Podcast, where chit-chat and shit shows come together for your entertainment. Tune in on your favorite streaming platforms with new episodes dropping every other Monday. Again, that's The Chit Show, a Bassblown entertainment podcast. If you're looking for fun events, awesome music, and enjoyable podcasts, then look no further. The Bassblown Entertainment family has you covered. With so many talented people in our community, it was only right that we not only bring you events, but all sorts of awesome entertainment. Follow Bassblown on social media or join our Discord community to stay updated and engaged in everything. That is at Bassblown on social media and discord.gg/Bassblown for our Discord. Bassblown Entertainment, bringing you more than just bass in your face.